Beneath the deserts of Yazd, where the air itself seems to shimmer with memory, the wind moves through the ruins like breath through a sleeping giant. At sunset, the cliffs ignite, crimson, gold, then ember, as if the land still remembers the fires that once defined it. Here, in the silence of Iran's high plains, an ancient flame refuses to die. It flickers unseen in the hollows of ruined temples, in the whispers of forgotten prayers, in the heartbeat of a faith older than empire itself. Long before the world spoke of gods carved in stone or written in scripture, the Persians worshipped something far more elemental: fire, the living light that bound heaven and earth. A traveler stands before the blackened stones of a fallen sanctuary. The desert wind hums through the broken columns, carrying grains of sand that glow like sparks against the dimming sky. What remains is not ruin, but remembrance, an altar that once held the sacred fire, the bridge between mortal and divine. How did this fire, born of chaos and destruction, become the heartbeat of a civilization? The story of Zoroastrianism begins not with conquest, but with a question. Nearly 3,000 years ago, a solitary thinker named Zarathustra looked upon the same horizon and asked why darkness existed beside light. From his reflections emerged a faith that saw the universe not as a place of submission, but of choice, a battle between Asha, truth and cosmic order, and Drudge, deceit and decay. Every human act became a small flame in that eternal struggle. To choose truth was to feed the fire. To lie was to extinguish it. Over time, this philosophy became the soul of Persia. Temples rose from desert stone, precise, austere, open to the sky. They were not houses of idols, but sanctuaries for light. Within them, the Magi, priestly scholars of Zoroastrianism, tended flames that burned unbroken for centuries. They fed them with sacred wood, purified air, and whispered hymns in the ancient Avestan tongue. Even now, in the excavated remains of Naksh-i-Rustam and Takht-e Soleyman, traces of soot cling to altar walls, black as midnight, yet untouched by rain. To these people, fire was more than warmth. It was intelligence, the visible thought of creation. They studied its movement as others studied stars. The flames of the temples were aligned with celestial rhythms, solstices, equinoxes, the rise of Sirius. Fire mirrored the heavens, its flicker a reflection of cosmic order. The ancients believed that to tend it faithfully was to keep the universe itself in balance. Archaeologists now trace how these temples were built, with vents for air to feed the flame, stone basins for ash, and open domes for the union of sky and fire. Each detail was both spiritual and scientific, a harmony of devotion and precision. In this union of ritual and reason, Persia found its identity, a civilization illuminated by faith and knowledge alike. As twilight deepens, the traveler kneels beside the broken altar. A breath of wind passes through, and for an instant the ashes stir, a shimmer of light in the gathering dark. Perhaps it is only the sun's last reflection, or perhaps something older still remembers being worshipped here. The camera rises above the ruins. The desert unfolds like an ocean of flame-colored stone, stretching toward infinity. Far on the horizon, a faint glow burns within a living temple, its light trembling like a memory that refuses to fade. They believed the world began in fire and would end in fire, that every spark was a covenant between humanity and the divine. Beneath the ember sky, time itself feels suspended, as if listening, and in that silence, the ancient truth endures. What is tended in faith never truly dies. In the mountains near Takht-e Soleyman, where snow gathers on the shoulders of forgotten citadels, the remains of a once luminous temple sleep
beneath a cold sky. The stones here are scorched and fractured, yet their silence feels deliberate, as if they are guarding something still alive within. At the heart of these ruins lies a circle of blackened altars, their symmetry almost mathematical. Long ago, this place was the holiest of sanctuaries, a geometry of faith built not to display power, but to maintain cosmic balance. The Persians believed that sacred architecture could mirror the order of the heavens. Every line, every shadow was an act of devotion. The temples of fire, from Pasargadae to Bishapur, were not conceived as palaces of the gods, but as instruments of eternity. Within their concentric sanctums, flames were tended not for spectacle, but for harmony. The builders of the Achaemenid and Sasanian dynasties understood stone as scripture. Each arch and dome was a verse in an ongoing conversation between earth and sky. Archaeologists working amid the ruins of Takht-e Soleyman describe how these structures once glowed from within, their inner chambers bathed in a shifting orange light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Excavations have revealed air vents carved with precision to sustain the fire without smoke, conduits that drew wind through the corridors like breath through lungs. Stone basins caught the sacred ash, believed to hold the essence of purity. Even the placement of each window served a purpose, to allow the morning sun to kiss the flame at dawn, to let the stars gaze upon it at night. Modern technology now helps us see what the ancients already knew. 3D scans show alignments so exact they defy coincidence. Temples positioned to catch the rise of Sirius, the descent of Venus, the turn of the solstice. The Magi, those philosopher-priests of Persia, understood this dance of light and shadow. They read the stars not for fortune, but for truth. Their rituals were timed to the heavens, their chants followed the rhythm of celestial movement. To tend the sacred fire was to sustain the universe, every flicker a small defiance against the encroaching dark. And yet, within this perfection, something human endures. You can almost imagine the priests in the quiet of midnight watching the flames rise and fall, their faces half lit, half lost in thought. Did they believe the fire to be the presence of Ahura Mazda, or a reflection of their own yearning for immortality? Perhaps it was both. Faith and architecture met here in a single act of creation, each structure a dialogue between divinity and decay. As night descends over Takht-e Soleyman, the cold air hums through the broken columns. A spark, faint, fragile, flickers within the dust. It is neither miracle nor accident, merely the wind finding the memory of flame. Yet in that moment, the ruin feels alive again. The mountain seems to exhale, and the silence deepens. The temples may have fallen, their geometry fractured, but their idea endures, that light, once kindled, cannot be unmade. Faith, too, is a kind of architecture, invisible, patient, defiant against time.
At the height of its power, Persia was an empire of light. From the marble terraces of Persepolis to the high sanctuaries of Ecbatana, flames burned in perfect stillness, tended day and night by the Magi. Each fire temple was both altar and observatory, a place where heaven and empire met. The kings who ruled this vast land, Darius, Xerxes, and their successors, did not see themselves as conquerors alone, but as guardians of order. They believed that their dominion over nations was an extension of the divine law, Asha, the eternal truth that bound stars, men, and kings alike. Before campaigns of conquest, kings would stand before the sacred fire, its golden shimmer reflecting in their bronze armor. Inscriptions carved into stone testify to these moments, prayers not for victory, but for righteousness, that the flame of truth might guide their hand. By the will of Ahura Mazda, Darius wrote, I am king. May my rule bring light where there is darkness. To govern in Persia was to preserve balance. To extinguish injustice was to feed the eternal flame. The empire itself became an extension of that sacred light. Roads stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, carrying not only armies and goods, but also the philosophy of Zoroaster, the conviction that every human act could tilt the scales of the cosmos. In Persepolis, where polished stone walls once caught the desert sun, artisans carved winged figures and radiant crowns, symbols of divinity and duty intertwined. The empire's art was not ornament, it was theology in stone. But even the brightest flame casts a shadow. In 330 BCE, when Alexander's armies swept across Persia, the night fell upon Persepolis. Ancient accounts speak of fire devouring the city's palaces, a vengeance disguised as celebration. Columns that once shimmered in sunlight now glowed in ruin, their reflections twisting in the inferno. For days, smoke rose like a ghost above the plain, and the sacred fires that once united the empire became witnesses to its undoing. Yet destruction was never complete. From the ashes, embers survived, carried secretly by the faithful, hidden within clay urns and whispered prayers. Along the Silk Roads, fragments of Zoroastrian ritual traveled eastward. In distant lands, echoes of Persian fire worship found new forms, in Manichaean light dualism, in Gnostic visions, in early Christian symbols of eternal flame. The wisdom of Persia, scattered like sparks, illuminated civilizations that never knew its name. Even as the empire crumbled, its ideas endured, invisible, persistent, like fire beneath ash. Today, standing among the ruins of Persepolis, where carved bulls still hold up nothing but air, one can almost hear the faint crackle of what once was. The wind hums through broken columns, carrying the scent of dust and time. Empires fall, but not all that burns is lost. Civilizations, it is said, die not when their temples collapse, but when their fires forget to burn. And here, beneath the pale desert sun, something still glows, the quiet afterlight of a world that once believed that truth itself could be kept alive in flame. When the Sasanian Empire fell in the 7th century, its temples smoldered in silence. Across Persia, the ancient faith of Zoroaster faced extinction beneath the tide of a new world. Fire altars were extinguished, magi dispersed, and the great sanctuaries of Yazd, Istok, and Ctesiphon fell to dust. Yet the sacred fire, that living symbol of divine order, did not die. It withdrew into hidden places, carried in secret by those who refused to let the light vanish. In the centuries that followed, Zoroastrianism lived in whispers. In mountain villages scattered across Yazd and Kerman, families built unmarked chambers within their homes, small, bare, without adornment, where a single lamp burned behind closed doors. These were not temples of grandeur, but of endurance. Archaeologists exploring these regions have found soot-stained niches carved into mud brick walls, fragments of copper lamps blackened with age, and tiny vents designed to draw breath into hidden flames. Each artifact is a fragment of defiance, proof that faith had learned to survive in silence. Historians trace how, as persecution deepened, groups of believers fled Persia's heartlands, journeying across deserts and sea to the western coast of India. There, among the palm groves of Gujarat, the exiled Persians found refuge and became known as the Parsis. Legend tells that they arrived carrying embers wrapped in clay pots, guarded by priests who never allowed the fire to die. Those same flames, historians believe, still burn in the oldest fire temples of India today. Carbon dating of ancient lamps unearthed near Sanjan confirms that the tradition of tending sacred fire continued uninterrupted for over 1,000 years. Through oral histories passed down in whispered Avestan, the story of exile becomes a meditation on resilience. When the temple falls, one old Zoroastrian saying goes, the heart becomes its altar. Even without the grand structures of their homeland, the Parsis and the hidden communities of Iran preserved what mattered most, the ritual of light. Every dawn the flame was fed, every dusk it was thanked. The fire became less a symbol of empire and more a companion of survival. its glow warming the dark corridors of displacement. In a small house in Yazd, an archaeologist films an old woman as she kneels before a narrow hearth, her hands trembling as she adds dry wood. The flame flutters and steadies, golden against the clay. She murmurs a prayer her ancestors once spoke in royal sanctuaries, now uttered in a room barely wide enough for breath. Around her, silence hums like devotion itself. The camera lingers on the light reflecting in her eyes, fragile, enduring, familiar. Centuries and empires have passed, yet that same radiance connects her to the priests of Persepolis, to the kings of fire and faith. Even in exile, the flame found its breath, small, defiant, eternal. It is here, not in palaces or ruins, that the true heart of Zoroastrianism endures, in the quiet persistence of those who refused to let the light go out.
In laboratories far from the deserts of Yazd, scientists now study the language of ancient fire. The same flames that once danced within Persian sanctuaries now flicker inside glass chambers, their secrets measured in wavelengths and spectra. Through thermal imaging, spectroscopy, and soot analysis, archaeologists are beginning to uncover what the ancients seemed to know instinctively, that fire was more than a symbol of faith. It was a science of transformation. Charred residue gathered from Sasanian altars reveals a deliberate formula. The ancient priests of Persia chose their materials not for scent or spectacle, but for precision. Traces of juniper, sandalwood, and frankincense appear in consistent patterns, each resin selected for the purity of its burn, its stability of heat, its clarity of smoke. The Magi were not only theologians, they were experimental chemists of their age. Their sacred ritual, feeding, tending, and protecting the flame, followed principles we now recognize as proto-scientific: control of oxygen flow, consistency of fuel, and the prevention of contamination. Infrared scans of ruins such as Takht-e Soleyman and Bishapur show the extraordinary sophistication of their engineering. Beneath the altars, ancient masons carved narrow air channels and chimney shafts that ensured a constant draft, maintaining the flame without suffocation. Even the dimensions of temple domes, reconstructed in simulation, reveal acoustic and thermal harmonies designed to sustain equilibrium. The fire, it seems, was not simply worshipped, it was studied, perfected, and preserved with mathematical care. In the sacred text known as the Vendidad, Zoroastrian purification rituals mirror early understandings of chemical hygiene. Water was filtered through ash, tools were cleansed with flame, and sacred implements were purified with sulfur and heat. The priests understood that fire could cleanse, transform, and reveal, properties now fundamental to modern chemistry and metallurgy. Through faith, they approached the threshold of science, crafting a world where the spiritual and the physical were inseparable. In modern reconstructions, researchers study flame patterns inside replicas of ancient altars. Using high-speed cameras and electromagnetic sensors, they observe how the flames form spirals of movement that correlate with principles of resonance and airflow, laws the ancients could not have named, yet somehow understood. Some speculate that the temple's architecture created an invisible harmony of air and energy, an interaction between structure and element that bordered on technology. But the question remains, were the eternal fires merely metaphors for divine presence, or early expressions of natural science disguised as ritual? In their precision and endurance, they reflect both. Faith gave the fire meaning, observation gave it mastery. The ancients may not have separated these truths at all. In a darkened laboratory, a recreated altar burns once more. The camera closes in on the flame's blue heart, where combustion becomes calm and nearly soundless. It trembles like a thought, bright, self-sustaining, alive. Perhaps the ancients understood something we are only rediscovering, that fire is not only light, but memory made visible. As the frame fades, the glow lingers on metal, glass, and stone, the same shimmer that once illuminated temples, now reflected in the instruments of science. Across millennia, the fire continues to speak, its language unchanged.
In the desert city of Yazd, where wind still carries the scent of ash and saffron, a single flame has burned without interruption for 15 centuries. It lives inside the Atash Behram, the fire of victory, behind glass, within a bronze vessel, tended by priests whose lineage stretches back to the last guardians of the Sasanian Empire. To enter is to step into a silence older than history. Pilgrims remove their shoes and speak only in whispers. Their reflections tremble in polished brass as the light ripples across the room, gold, steady, alive. This is not ceremony, it is continuity. The flame, they say, has survived conquest, exile, and the indifference of time. Its embers were once carried across deserts in sealed urns, tended in secret during centuries when the faith itself was forbidden to breathe. Yet here it still burns, defying oblivion. It has witnessed kings and conquerors, the fall of empires, the vanishing of languages, the birth of new worlds. What remains is not grandeur, but quiet persistence, a heartbeat of a civilization that refused to forget itself. Outside, Yazd wakes slowly under a pale desert sun. Domes and wind towers rise from clay rooftops, their shapes echoing the geometry of vanished temples. The call to prayer mingles with the rustle of date palms, and somewhere beyond the city, dunes stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Within the temple, the fire glows like an eye that never closes. Its tenders feed it with dried wood, bow their heads, and step back in reverence. The same ritual, unchanged for 1,000 years. For historians, this living flame is a miracle of endurance. For those who stand before it, it is something more, a mirror. In its glow, one sees not only the memory of an empire, but the reflection of a deeper truth, that faith, once kindled, cannot be extinguished by time alone. It endures because humanity needs it to, not as doctrine, but as reminder. The fire's light is the same that once illuminated Persepolis, the same that flickered in hidden chambers during exile, the same that burns now in the hearts of those who remember. As night falls again over Yazd, the flame steadies, blue at its center, gold at its edge, a perfect balance between heaven and earth. The camera draws closer, and the sound fades until only the faint hiss of burning wood remains. The narrator's voice softens, barely more than breath. This is not an ending, but an echo, the shimmer of something eternal repeating itself across ages.